We are honored to have with us today U.S. Ag Secretary Tom Vilsack and former Central Coast Congressman Sam Farr. Together, they have planted a seed, along with Troy Phillips, for a new and improved agricultural service lab in Salinas. And today, that vision is becoming a reality, and we thank you. And we even have some thoughts about what the name might even be, Mr. Secretary. So just keep that in mind. We're sure darn proud of the work you all did together, but we really appreciate Congressman Farr's work over the decades. So just in case you needed an idea, we got one for you. And with that said, let us fill our guest in on who they're going to be visiting with a little bit. Thomas J. Vilsack was confirmed as the 32nd United States Secretary of Agriculture on February 23rd, 2021 by the U.S. Senate. And I think that was a pretty easy call. He had 8 years of experience before under President Obama. And as the leader of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, as the 30th Secretary of Agriculture between 2009 and 2017, he worked hard to strengthen the American agricultural economy, build vibrant rural communities, and create new markets for innovation in rural America. He fought to put Americans back to work by investing in rural infrastructure, renewable energy, and large-scale conservation partnerships. Former Congressman Farr, a fifth-generation California, represented the state's beautiful Central Coast. Throughout his 20-plus year tenure, he has been a leading advocate for California agriculture, an outspoken advocate for affordable housing, and a champion of the oceans. In Congress from 1993 to 2016, Congressman Farr served on the powerful House Appropriations Committee, which oversees the distribution of the federal budget. He was the ranking member of the Appropriations Subcommittee on Agriculture, Rural Development, and Food and Drug Administration, as well as sat on the Subcommittee on Military, Construction, and Veteran Affairs. Gentlemen, welcome, and delighted to turn it over to Congressman Farr to visit with the Secretary.
Well, thank you very much, Dennis. And thank you, Dr. Ochoa, for your introduction, and congratulations on all the rankings the school just received in the top 50 and top 25 in the whole country. That's remarkable rankings. But best of all, I want to thank my friend, Secretary Vilsack. It's so great to see you again. I think that our friendship and passion for the issues are similar. You grew up in a small town, and I grew up in a small town. You ended up being a mayor. You ended up being in the state legislature. I was a county supervisor and then served in the state legislature. And then I went to Congress, and you ran for president of the United States. And if you can't beat him, join him. And you were Secretary of Agriculture under Barack Obama. And so pleased you're back in that position now. I don't know of anybody in government that understands rural America better. And the need for us to commit to rural resources to really have a sustainable rural communities. And that is all about poverty. And as you know, I got my experience of learning about the culture of poverty as a Peace Corps volunteer in Colombia, South America. But what I found is that you understood these issues, and not only agriculture, which Central Coast is where agriculture began on the Pacific Rim, but it's also probably the most productive county in the world, and over 100 crops growing here. But we also have poverty programs. We probably have the largest farm worker population in the United States in a county. We have still rural poverty. We have areas that have not been accessed by broadband, and you have a marvelous number of programs. And I thought today what we could do is share the depth of the Department of Agriculture and your passion for getting people to understand not only what it does, but to come and work for it. So thank you for coming to our area via this technology, and welcome to our Fireside Chat.
Well, Mr. Chairman, it's good to be back with you. Looking forward to the chat, and certainly appreciate the suggestion in terms of the lab. No one was a greater advocate for research and for the necessity of having upgraded research facilities than Sam Farr. So it is appropriate for folks to advocate for your name to be on that lab facility.
So let's get into what the role of the department is. I think it's There's so many areas. I mean, what I loved about it and why I got on the Ag Appropriations Committee is that you talk about foreign policy, Department of Agriculture's embassies all over the world. You talk about the whole frontier of organic growing, which started here. You're involved. You talk about specialty crops, which are the crops we grow. They're not the commodity crops that don't get a lot of assistance like the commodity crops, where our really investment is in research. How do we get a better bang for our buck in agriculture, and how do we make it more sustainable so that this precious land in California that everybody wants to cover over with houses, we can keep in rural, in an open space. I think the Department of Agriculture does a lot for conservation, and you have conservation programs. But probably to my heart, which you are so good at, is speaking to the needs of rural America in terms of its poverty problems. And I thought maybe you could expand on some of that today.
Well, first of all, it's an incredibly important place, rural America, to the entire country. The reality is, if you stop and think about where the food comes from that feeds most of us, it comes from rural places. When you talk about water, whether scarcity or quality or quantity, rural America has a profound impact. What goes on in rural America has a profound impact on the level of water, the amount of water, the quality of water that we have available to us. Every time you flip on the light switch, every time you turn on your computer and you hook it into the outlet, every time you're going to take that electric vehicle and plug it in, you have to ask yourself, where does the feedstock come from that provides that power? Well, most of it comes from rural places, whether it's a windmill, a solar panel, or even a mine. And then when you talk about the value system that's so important to the country, especially at a time where there is great division in this country, the reality is that I used to say, and still do say, that a substantial percentage of our military comes from rural communities. Why? Because they're raised with a value system that you can't keep taking from something that's of value to you. You have to contribute back to it. And young people go into the service of their government and their country in an effort to give back. And I think that's frankly what students who may be watching this today need to think about when they think about their life, their vocation, basically being an opportunity to give back to places where they came from. And there's no better department when it comes to rural places to give back, to make a difference, to fundamentally change the direction of rural America than at the Department of Agriculture. Why are we concerned about it? Well, to your question, higher poverty rates, significantly higher poverty rates, an aging population. But it is also the place, frankly, where I think the greatest amount of innovation and opportunity is going to be coming as we deal with climate. If we're truly serious about climate change, then we have to be serious about converting our extraction economy, which we've had forever in rural places, and replace it with a circular economy. And I think young people understand that. And I think they would want to be part of the department that will help bring that circular economy, greater profitability, more jobs, greater farm income to the country, to rural places. And that's at the Department of Agriculture.
Well, you also are in charge of you have in your department, the Department of Forestry Service. And a lot of people don't know that that's in the Department of Agriculture. And the Forest Service probably has about 1/3 of the lands in America. And that is essentially probably the largest sequestration with all of trees that you manage and managing forests as well. And here in California, we've been had all these forest fires, including our own here in Los Padres National Forest, which covers about half of our county. So there's all kinds of new opportunities in forest management also.
Well, the Forest Service controls 193 million acres of forest and grasslands. And you all in California are acutely aware of what happens when you don't invest appropriately in the maintenance and management of those forests. Let me just give you a sense of the Dixie Fire that we just went through. Horrific fire. Covered almost 1 million acres of forested area. Just to give you a sense of how much 1 million acres of forested area is, it's 80 square miles. 80 square miles of trees that were destroyed. And the challenge for us, I think, is to reduce the hazardous fuel buildup so that the carbon that's stored in those trees stays in the trees stays in construction material that goes into building brand new ways of construction. I can tell you that we're seeing the beginnings of, I think, a tremendous effort to utilize wood and wood products in structural members for buildings, not just the outdoors, not or outside, not just the ornate parts of a building, but the opportunity to put the structure, the skeleton of a building made from wood, more fire retardant, interestingly enough, than perhaps asphalt, cement or aluminum. An opportunity to really create these amazingly beautiful facilities. Why is that important? Because it keeps the carbon stored. It gives us a market opportunity for those diseased trees, whereas before we just didn't know what to do with them. Well, now we do, and I think we're going to see more innovation in that space. And the Forest Service not only is about managing those forested areas and those grassland areas, but also about creating through innovation new market opportunities for wood products, as well as doing research on better ways to utilize wood in a variety of different ways. So a lot of interesting activities and opportunities within the Forest Service, no question.
Well, thank you for that. Let's dwell a little bit on the programs that the department does in the poverty area, particularly in rural poverty, the infrastructure. I mean, you have water, you have communications, broadband, you have housing. You're the only department that deals with farm worker housing. You also have programs for non-farm workers in rural areas as well. We have a huge housing shortage here. Our growers have done an amazing job of beginning to take private sector money and build beautiful homes for a farm worker community, because they need that workforce to stay here. But we still have some rural areas in this area that are just as remote as almost any place you can imagine. So I know your department speaks to that. It's not just all crops and commodities.
No, that's right. We have a very large, I remember being on Air Force One with President Obama early in his first term, and it was explaining to him what we were doing at USDA. I thought he would be interested. So I handed him a sheet of paper that essentially outlined the number of home loans we had done at USDA. He looked at the paper and he said, what is this? I said, well, sir, it's a number of home loans we've done in the last 6 months while you've been president. I thought you'd be interested in your home state. He said, you do home loans? I said, yes, sir. I said, we have about 1 million loans in our loan portfolio. If USDA were a bank, I think we'd be the 11th largest bank in the country. Our loan portfolio is around 240 billion, that's with a B, $billion. We have about 1.1 million home loans. So we do single family home loans. We also have a very extensive multifamily portfolio where we're helping people in apartment complexes. And right now with the pandemic, very serious issues relative to being able to keep people in these homes. And so we are working with the American Rescue Plan resources to provide assistance and help. So those who are financially stressed, can't make that house payment, we're helping them out. We have about $38 million to provide help and assistance in that space. And then we most recently invested $100 million in helping those who are significantly burdened with rent, where 50% or more of their income was going to rent payments. We essentially gave them some relief so that they could stay in their homes. And of course, we're encouraging folks to take full advantage of the resources provided to states to keep people in their homes. So that's part of it. We also, very much involved in rehab. We also are involved in self-help housing. We work with outfits like Habitat for Humanity to basically provide resources for self-help construction. And as you mentioned, the farm worker issue is a really important one. Very disappointed that the parliamentarian didn't see fit to put in the Senate Reconciliation Bill the Farm Worker Modernization Act, because that would have helped basically provide stability for this ag workforce. And part of it was USDA increasing its commitment to the farm worker housing that you just mentioned, so that we can improve benefits, improve wages, provide some stability to growers, particularly in the western part of the country. It's a great program. You remember in Congress what happens. There's an issue, and they'll come to you, Mr. Chairman, and they'll say, here's our issue. And unfortunately, it never gets to your level unless it's a really hard issue, where it's not an easy thing to solve. And there are usually 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different interest groups that all have conflicts. And they basically throw it in your lap and say, fix it. And then they lobby the living daylights out of you, and they pester you with emails and calls and everything. And you're just trying to do the right thing. But this situation was different. This time, the growers and the unions got together and said, look, we're going to make it easy for these guys. We're not going to force them to have to choose between us. We're going to work it out ourselves. And they worked out a very solid compromise. Passed the House, bipartisan vote. Let me emphasize that. Bipartisan vote. Passed the House. Now stuck in the Senate. Why? Because a number of Republicans, predominantly, are unwilling to take the political vote, which would take some courage, to actually embrace this compromise. And it's a really unfortunate circumstance. But yes, we have very significant housing. And don't even get me started on broadband. I'm sure you will. That's a vital infrastructure that we really have to put resources behind, because there are too many rural, remote areas that simply don't have adequate service today.
Well, thank you. I know that broadband is a big issue here for our rural communities. And you, as you pointed out in our discussions before our committee, that you can't keep people in the rural areas unless they have access to the internet, and businesses won't locate there or relocate. And I know you have a lot of wonderful ideas about bringing businesses back, companies back to manufacture in the rural areas so they can use the byproducts of agriculture as the raw material and provide those jobs in rural America instead of in urban.
That's right. You know, if you're going to be serious about climate, you have to be serious about creating that circular economy where there is no such thing as agricultural waste. You're constantly converting it into something more valuable. You're taking the methane from a dairy operation and you're converting it into fuel. You're taking that manure from an operation, a farming operation, and you're converting it into a multitude of materials, fabrics, and fibers, so that you essentially reduce the greenhouse gas imprint and footprint of that farming operation. But you know, you can't market any of that. You can't sell it beyond, you know, a county or two unless you have the technology to get the message out. Well, that's broadband. And unfortunately, there are maps being circulated from time to time that say, well, 90% of America's got broadband coverage. But wait a minute, what kind of coverage do they have? You know, if the upload and download speeds are incredibly slow, you don't really have functional broadband. So again, part of what we hope we'll see from the reconciliation package that's currently before Congress is a $65 billion commitment to a variety of entities within the federal government. The USDA will receive several $billions. And what we will do with that resource is we'll go into those areas that have are underserved, that have broadband that just simply is so slow, for all intents and purposes, you don't have broadband. And we will encourage an upgrade of the speed so that people meaningfully have access to broadband. Now, who benefits from that? Well, I'll tell you, a farmer who wants real-time information on markets. You know, a second or two, a minute or two delay can make a difference between a farm operation being profitable or not, because markets change instantaneously. You got to know what the market is to be able to decide when to sell. Or that small business that wants to expand market opportunity. They've got a branded product that's well known in the local area, but they'd like to sell it across the country, across the world. How do they market it? Well, they've got to use broadband. Or maybe it's a teacher. In the face of the pandemic, we certainly learned of the importance of distance learning, where kids were at home. Maybe they're quarantined because a member of their family has COVID. So how do they learn? Well, they have to have broadband. Or maybe it's someone who wants to some health care and wants to see a specialist, but that specialist is 200 miles away. But if their hospital has telemedicine, well, that specialist all of a sudden is like you and me. We're talking across the country here today, and it's just the same as being in the room with you. So all of this requires technology, and it requires investment. And the private sector is not going to do it by themselves because they can't make a profit in these small, sparsely populated areas. But that doesn't mean people should be denied the ability to have that opportunity that somebody in the city or suburb has. So that's what USDA is all about. It's about equalizing. It's about leveling the playing field. It's about creating equal opportunity, if you will, to utilize these technologies.
I love your story also about how people didn't know that your grant program for rural community centers and rural and community buildings could help mental health programs and things like that. I mean, people, don't think about that being in mainline agriculture, but that program is in your department.
That's right. It's a community facility grant program, loan program. You were a great supporter of it when you were in Congress because you understood its reach. When we had in the Obama administration, we had a lot of gun violence, still do, unfortunately, tragically today. One of the answers to try to mitigate the consequences of all of this is to have access to mental health services, either to prevent the situation from occurring, but certainly to deal with the impact if you, God forbid, have something like that happen in the community. Well, in rural places, it's hard to find those services. But if you have a community facility grant, you can basically build and equip a mental health center. So again, at the cabinet meeting, going around the table one day, the president was trying to get enough money together to put together a $100 million proposal to expand access to mental health. HHS had $50 million that they could put in the pot. We went around the table, and I think I may have been the last person to be asked by the president if we could contribute anything. And I said, well, sure, we can. And I didn't even hesitate. I said, yeah, well, we could do that. And I can remember then Vice President Biden head whipping around, looking at me like, what are you talking about? You're the Department of Agriculture. I said, sir, we have the Community Facility and Loan Program. We can do this. Well, we ended up doing $280 million, and I think we did something like 82 or 83 mental health centers. Last night I was in Iowa, had a dinner, a small town. It was a fall festival kind of thing. You've been to a million of those. And I'm sitting next to the school principal, the elementary school principal. And he's talking to me about this vacant lot that they've had for 10 years. And as their school is expanding, they want to build, but boy, they're just not sure how they're going to afford it. I said, well, have you thought about USDA? And he looked at me and he goes, what do you, I said, we could help you finance that school construction, schools, hospitals, mental health centers, community centers, playgrounds, swimming pools, you name it. Anything that will impact and affect the quality of life, we can do. And again, if your students are watching this and they think, boy, that'd be kind of cool to be in a position of being able to help communities, build schools, build hospitals. Why is that important? Because if you're a Chamber of Commerce director and you're trying to get a business to locate in your small town and you don't have a hospital and you don't have a school, pretty hard to sell. If you have a brand new hospital or a spanking new school, or you have a well-equipped hospital, or you've got up-to-speed broadband, then it's a little bit easier marketing opportunity, and you can get those folks, and then you use USDA housing programs to make sure you got enough houses for these new workers.
Mr. Secretary, when I first learned about you, you were running for president of the United States and you were governor of Iowa. And I learned about you because the faculty at the Naval Postgraduate School, civilian faculty, one of the faculty members said, I'm taking a leave from my job to go work on candidate Governor Vilsack's campaign. And I said, who? And he said, you gotta know about this guy. He just has an amazing background and just a wonderful human being. And that's what sort of got me interested in you. And then when you became secretary and I had all these issues with the Department of Agriculture, you were so helpful in many ways. There are a lot of students here watching who are looking to the future, and some of them come from really tough backgrounds. And you certainly had tough background. Could you just explain to them a little bit about your life and what drove you to get into public service?
Well, appreciate you mentioning the presidential campaign. I think you spent more time talking about it than I was in as a candidate, so I appreciate that. I chose to run the year Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, John Edwards, they all ran at the same time. Look, I remember being in the gymnasium at Iowa Wesleyan University in the small town where my wife was raised and where I came to live with her when we were married. I practiced law there. And I was giving the speech declaring my candidacy. And I thought to myself, man, this is an amazing country. Because I started out life in a relatively humble circumstance. I was in an orphanage in Pittsburgh. My birth mother, for whatever reason, was not in a position to be able to raise me. So she went into this, what they referred to it as an asylum back in those days for unwed moms. And I gave birth to me in December, and she left in January. And I was in this orphanage, and I was fortunate. My parents decided that they had lost a child during the pregnancy, and they couldn't have any more children, so they decided to adopt. And we came to the orphanage, and as they explained it, it sounds kind of like what folks do at Thanksgiving when they try to purchase the Thanksgiving turkey. They look for the plumpest turkey they could find. So that's kind of the explanation that my parents gave me. They said, you look like you were pretty plump back in those days, and that meant you were probably healthy. And a lot of the kids at this orphanage did have some physical challenges, and several of them had polio, as it turned out. Anyway, I got adopted into this family, and it was a loving family, but by no means was it necessarily an easy childhood. My mom, a tremendous woman, probably one of the greatest influencers on my life. She struggled with addiction for a number of years. Was very depressed, was hospitalized multiple times. And it was a tough situation when I was growing up in that circumstance. Parents separated. I lived with my dad for a while as a single parent. He did his best. He was dealing with a struggling business and ultimately a failing business. And so while we had security early in my life, as time went on, we got less secure financially. And my father sacrificed everything he had, literally everything he had, so that I got an education. I figured if he invested in my education, that eventually that would be money well spent. And I remember calling him to tell him that I had been admitted to law school. I had struggled to try to get into law school. I applied to 9 law schools, only got into 1. And I said, Dad, I got into law school. And he said, I don't know how we're going to find the money to get you through, but we'll find it. Unfortunately, the next day he passed away. You know, when people talk about government programs, it's easy to demonize them, but I'll tell you what, Social Security, veterans benefits, student loans, a public school education, teacher salary, when I got married to Christy, all of that was government, which gave me the ability to get a law degree, which in turn allowed me to practice law, and ended up having this amazing life that I've led. Certainly didn't start out, and I often said if my parents knew that I had been the Secretary of Agriculture, not once but twice, they would have probably said the country had gone in the wrong direction. But it, you know, I learned a lot. My mom overcoming that addiction as she did. My parents reunited just a couple years before Dad died. You know, they sacrificed. It's a story that's replayed in so many households. And so no matter where your students happen to be in life today, no matter how difficult it might be, boy, there's opportunity out there. And if they get that education, a quality education, that opens up the door. And then once you get the door open, it's a matter of you taking full advantage.
Well, I'm very proud to be standing in the auditorium of the California State University at Monterey Bay, which I helped found when Fort Ord closed, in converting a military base from swords to plowshares. And what's remarkable about this university, from the upstart, it was dedicated to serving the underserved populations of California, particularly the farm worker population, for children whose parents had never graduated from high school to have easy access. And access is 2 things: it's affordability and distance. And if you have access, then you have an opportunity. I mean, I learned the culture of poverty is, I lived around thousands of people who couldn't read and write. They couldn't tell what bus to take. They didn't know money. They couldn't count. I mean, they were totally, their whole life was dependent on oral communication, and no chance for any opportunity. And if you have a safe place to live and you have access to medicine, so when you're sick, or more importantly, you also have access to education, you have a good chance. And that's what your life story is. You had good chances and you took advantage of them. And I want people to know that the U.S. Department of Agriculture is the poverty program for America. It is the It's the innovation of how we sustain this country and how we sustain the globe with, through forestation and all kinds of other innovative systems. So I really appreciate your taking time to share with us. And I know we have some questions from students who want to get right to you.
Great, let's do it.
I think it's about time we do that. Come technology, there's 100,000 jobs out there, 100. It's a big department.
Well, that's right. It impacts and affects everyone's life in this country at some point in time during the day and during the year. So it's an amazing department. You mentioned the poverty programs. I was thinking about you the other day when the largest increase in the SNAP program in the last 45 years was ultimately authorized when we revised the Thrifty Food Plan.
I have to tell everybody the SNAP program is the old food stamp program.
Right. And
It's
now,
not called.
yeah, it's not called food stamps anymore.
But what's wonderful about it, I'll tell you a story here, that we have a nonprofit that teaches farm workers how to upgrade their skill levels so that they can go from being harvesters to managing crops and actually owning them and being organic growers, because the amount of capital needed to start organic is much less than big agriculture. So this single mom went to this course and decided to use her kids to help her start an organic garden. She took the produce from the organic garden and opened up a farmer's market outside the WIC Center, the Women, Infant, and Children's Center, which pregnant women and new mothers come to learn about nutrition and get the old WIC vouchers to be able to go out and buy food. Well, then when you walked out the door, here was nothing but organic food everywhere. All started by a woman who probably started on that program and became then an entrepreneur. All of those lessons and opportunities were because of the Department of Agriculture. So yeah, it's a lot of opportunity that we have in this country to still do a lot of inventive food service.
Do you want me to access some of these questions that are in the question and answer box? I'm happy to try.
I'm standing here in front of a big screen. I don't know exactly how the question and answers are going to go. Maybe I'm supposed to ask them. I do have a couple of things here. I think you answered the one on how did you overcome your obstacles. The other is, what are the trends that you have noticed since the pandemic?
That's a great question, and I'll tell you, I think the thing that probably underscores everything we're doing right now at USDA in response to that question is looking at the fragility of our food system. The reality, I think, during the pandemic is we realized what we thought was a fairly stable and secure system had a lot of issues with it that created disruptions, and we're trying to address and strengthen our food system. First of all, we noticed that it was difficult for the food system to transition from a reliance on food being food service being served in restaurants and school meals and things of that nature, had to shift very quickly to food assistance. And we realized that we needed to do more to build up the infrastructure of our food banks and our pantries to be able to receive fresh fruits and vegetables and dairy products, because they didn't have the storage capacity, didn't have the refrigeration capacity. So we recently announced, as part of a TFAP, which is a temporary emergency food assistance program, $100 million that's going to go to food banks and pantries to basically help them shore up their infrastructure so they're in a position to be able to store and refrigerate these fresh fruits and vegetables that are available potentially. We also created a dairy donation program. There was a disincentive to donate. We saw it tragically during the early days of the pandemic. Farmers were destroying crops. They were dumping milk. They were euthanizing animals because they had no market. So now for the dairy farmers, we've created a dairy donation program that essentially creates a financial incentive for them and for processors to donate. So we're strengthening. Just today, we announced additional resources in the loan guarantee program to sort of address the issue of cold storage and mobile slaughter units. All of these things designed to provide some degree of stability and resilience into our system. The other big issue that's taking a lot of our time there are two big issues. Is climate is one, and equity is the other. We continue to deal with equity issues in terms of unserved and underserved populations, distressed farmers that, this is, when I came back to this job, I was really surprised to see this statistic from the ERS that 89.6% of farms today don't generate the majority of income for the farm family that operates the farm, which I think is a clarion call for us to transform our food system, particularly as it relates to local and regional food systems, to create new market opportunities for these smaller and mid-sized producers for organic, for value added. And climate, I think, creates an opportunity to do that. So there's a lot of opportunity here to redesign our food system, to make it more resilient, to make it climate friendly, more sustainable, to create more opportunities for small and mid-sized operators to profit, and more opportunities for farmers generally to profit. And that's what we're going to be doing for the next three plus years of this administration, is really focusing on trying to get that turned around.
I'd also like to ask you, we have another university here, the Monterey Institute of International Studies, which is owned by Millbury, operated by Millbury, is a foreign trade school, international studies and non-proliferation, things like that. I thought for a moment you could just speak to how the Department of Agriculture plays a role in the international scene, and certainly in the the Food for Peace, the McGovern-Dole food program for schools in Africa and sub-Saharan Africa.
Well, there are two aspects of our foreign engagement. Trade is one of them, and then the food programs is the other aspect. Let me deal with the food programs first, since you asked about it specifically. The McGovern-Dole program is an amazingly effective program. We want to help young people, and particularly young women, go to school and stay in school. In many developing countries, it is hard to encourage young women to go to school and stay in school because their families need income or need support from them. And so the way you essentially entice the mom and dad to allow the daughter to go to school is by having a feeding program at the school, so that mom and dad know that at least once a day their child's going to get fed and get fed a nutritious, meaningful meal. So the McGovern-Dole basically provides resources to make that happen. Recently, Vice President Harris, who was put in charge of dealing with some of the immigration issues, asked us to look at ways in which we might be able to help Guatemala specifically expand its program so that we could keep young people. We were finding that a lot of young people were moving to the border because they were seeking opportunity elsewhere. And so the McGovern-Dole program was expanded in that country for that purpose. The Food for Peace program also is a vehicle through USAID, working with USAID to basically, in areas where there is a need for support and help, we provide emergency food. We also provide money to purchase food from that's grown in country, so that we support local agriculture as well. The other aspect of our international involvement is trade. 20 to 30% of everything we grow and raise in this country is ultimately shipped somewhere else. And we have trading relations in virtually every continent. And it's employment. Nearly 1 million people are employed as a result of agricultural trade. So it's important for us to continue to maintain that. So we're constantly negotiating. We're constantly looking for ways in which we can reduce the friction between trade in the U.S. Agricultural products and other countries. Right now we have a very interesting relationship with China. It's a major purchaser of goods, but frankly, they have not lived up totally and completely to their phase one responsibility. So we're now asking them, putting this on the table for them to understand that we expect them to meet their requirements. New opportunities in Kenya, in the African continent, offer a set of challenges and opportunities for us. And then continuing to work in our own hemisphere by making sure that the USMCA, the United States and Mexico Canada trade agreement, is basically implemented the way it was intended. So a lot going on in this space.
Another question was asked is that we're in a kind of a struggle here, a philosophical discovery of whether our water systems ought to be owned by the public or private sector. We have both here. corporate water companies and public water districts. Really, the water districts are very small, the public ones. There's an idea that we should take it all over public ownership. Does the department have any program or have any thoughts on private ownership, private development of water versus rural or public ownership?
Yeah,
Are there any-
our focus on water is, I think, in two areas. One, providing resources for water treatment, for water access, making sure that we are providing the resources for communities that are struggling, smaller communities of less than 10,000 people who might not be able to afford to raise water rates to a point where they can afford on their own to build a water treatment facility or to have a sewage plant. So we basically come in with loans and grants to provide help and assistance. The other area, I think, is figuring out how to use water more effectively. There's a need for us to have climate smart agricultural practices as it relates to water. Instead of flooding farms like we used to, looking at ways in which we could be more precise with the irrigation we have. Developing crops, there's a tremendous science component to USDA. We develop crops that can use less water, that figure out how to grow even though there's drought, which the folks in the western part of the country certainly understand and appreciate the importance of. So I think there's a focus on efficient and effective use of water and preserving precious water resources. Gets back to the Forest Service. If we don't maintain our forests properly, they don't conserve and preserve water resources as effectively either. So that's part of our mission.
It's very interesting in talking about how we need to maintain our forests where the sort of water is born. It's healthy, also to have healthy supplies of water. A lot of interest in this area, being a very progressive environmental area, of what the department is doing regarding climate change. What is your role in this, in the president's big picture?
We just released a very extensive strategy paper on climate. It starts with the president, who articulated during his campaign the need for U.S. agriculture, and for that matter, the U.S. economy, to get to a net zero emission standard by the year 2050. Agriculture is roughly 10% of our greenhouse gas emissions in the U.S. That compares favorably to the rest of the world, where it's somewhere between 12 and 14%. But there's a lot of opportunity here. And to me, it isn't just about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but doing it in a way that creates new income opportunities for farmers. So one of the things we're doing is we're leveraging our existing resources, our existing programs, to really support climate smart agricultural practices. We know that there are practices that have a positive impact on soil health, on carbon sequestration and storage, on water efficiency, on better forest management. So making sure that we're using our existing programs to complement and to support those programs. We also know that we need more data, we need more information on what works and how best to combine climate smart practices. So we just launched last week at Colorado State University. I gave a speech in which we're launching the Climate Smart Partnership Initiative, where we're going to basically provide resources for large-scale demonstration and pilot projects to encourage aggregation of a lot of small farming operations, give them a suite of conservation practices that they can embrace, allow them resources so they aren't incurring the cost of doing this, and then monitoring and evaluating and testing and verifying the results of those activities, so we can create what I refer to as a climate smart commodity. A lot of food processing, a lot of entities are asking for proof that a particular product, a particular vegetable, particular fruit, particular protein source has been generated through sustainable practices. Well, there's a value component there, and we want farmers to be able to capture that value component. So giving us the data that will allow us to establish what the standard should be so that a commodity can call itself climate smart. And then as we do, it's likely that those standards will allow the carbon markets and other ecosystem service markets that are out there to essentially reward that behavior by basically paying the farmer for a carbon credit, or paying a farmer for a water credit, or paying a farmer for wildlife habitat preservation. And all of that creates new income sources for farmers at every level. So that's an exciting initiative. We've got research projects, We just launched a Center of Excellence, which is a combination of our ARS facilities who will collaborate on research. We're looking at ways in which we can do better forest management. Again, somewhat dependent on resources coming from Congress under the reconciliation bill and the infrastructure bill, which we hope and believe will pass at some point, giving us the resources and capacity to do this. So there's a lot going on in this space, using our procurement dollars. As we look at ways in which we can use our dollars in a way to promote markets, to create markets for climate smart commodities. That's another opportunity that we're looking at.
Yeah, I would really hope that the department can work on the ability to kind of buy locally in our big programs, like our school lunch program and our big commodity for billing for military programs, where the government, we buy an awful lot of food. I think probably the Department of Agriculture and the school lunch program and the Department of Defense buy a lot of food. And the idea is, how can we and I know you're working on it, how can we make those things more locally connected? So that food doesn't have to be shipped all the way across the country, or it's dependent on commodities on the other side of the Sierras and things like that.
Well, when you were the chair of the Appropriations Subcommittee for Agriculture, you were a strong supporter of the Farm to School program, which was a small amount of money, but it has led to a rather significant expansion of this concept. And it directly points to your question of linking local producers with purchasing opportunities from local schools and institutions. That's a terrific opportunity. We're going to see an expansion of that effort. We're also, I mentioned earlier, the TFAP, the Temporary Emergency Assistant Food Program. We created what we refer to as a flexible TFAP, where we allocated $500 million for TFAP purchase that had to be funneled through local and regional distributors. Instead of going to the national big guys, we're basically going to go to the smaller mid-sized guys who are in business in regions or in localities. And then we also required 400 million of additional 400 million to be purchased from underserved, distressed, historically underserved producers. So we created an equity opportunity to create a local and regional food system opportunity out of this. I think you're going to see more of us doing this. You're going to see more investment in building up the supply chain and building up the infrastructure that will allow us to see more local and regional food purchases, because that's also climate friendly. You're reducing the number of miles that the food has to travel in order to get from your farms to my table.
And you've been allowing the food stamps, the SNAP program vouchers to be used in the farmers markets and things like that really keep the buying power local and into fresh commodities and fresh products. And that's terrific.
And we recently awarded about $75 million in the Gus Schumacher program. That's also a program I think you were helpful in getting started, which provides a bit of an incentive. So when people utilize their SNAP card to buy a fruit or vegetable, instead of that dollar gets matched, if you will, by this program, so that they're in a position to be able to purchase more fruits and vegetables. We just recently announced an effort to try to expand WIC opportunities by creating a bonus payment within WIC, so more fruits and vegetables could be available to pregnant moms and to young children. The summer EBT program, another opportunity for us to see ways in which we give parents the resources that allows them to feed their children during the summer months. We do a pretty good job during the school year. In fact, Tufts University has suggested the healthiest place for kids to eat outside the home is at the school. We want to continue that opportunity, but obviously school's not in session. So you give mom and dad a little extra cash during those summer months, allows them to stretch their food dollar and make sure that they're making healthy choices for their children.
You seem to have generated a lot of interest from students. There are a couple of questions flowing in here. They now are interested in jobs in the USDA, and they ask, what can a business person do to help the environment as a business student, and another one wanting to know what can I do regarding climate change if I come to work for the Department of Agriculture.
Well, you can be part of the Climate Smart Partnership Initiative and figure out whether or not certain conservation practices, how effective they are. You could work for NRCS and provide the technical assistance to farmers on the ground. You can be a researcher at one of these research facilities, either our research facility or the land-grant university, through a grant funded by the Department of Agriculture to take a look at ways in which plants and crops can use water more efficiently, can essentially sequester more carbon. Looking at root systems and looking at photosynthesis. You could be the farm service person that basically provides the loan to the farmer to get started under a beginning farmer and loan program. Or you could be the rural development director in your community and basically make application to the Department of Agriculture for a business and loan, an industry loan that will allow a processing facility to come in to convert manure into a multitude of different products, creating jobs, and allowing that farmer to basically be able to market his or her product as net zero emissions. Or you could actually work here at the department and try to see ways in which we can expand our organic program, ways in which we can strengthen the supply chain, create new markets for organic, ways in which we can create a transition. What people don't know is if you wanted to convert from a conventional farming operation to a organic, or let's say you're a beginning farmer, you get a little acreage, use that microloan program that we have at USDA. You rent that land, you realize that land hasn't been farmed in a way that's consistent with organic. You've got to go through a 3-year transition period to get to that point. Well, we're going to try to provide you some help and assistance during that transition. You can be part of the person that provides those resources. I mean, there are unlimited opportunities here, and we have a relatively aging workforce, so there are going to be lots and lots of openings. So we'd strongly encourage all of the folks watching this to consider USDA. It's an exciting place to work. It's underappreciated in Washington, D.C. You don't hear as much about it as maybe the State Department or the Defense Department or some of these other departments. But I'm telling you, there's no department any day of the week that impacts and affects more Americans than we do.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. I guess I can't, at this moment, say that the best training to go into the Department of Agriculture is to join the Peace Corps. I'm always advocating for Peace Corps service.
Well, you know, we're going to have, here's how I'd respond to that. We've got a civilian conservation corps, so you can have, it's not overseas, but you can work in that, or if the president's budget gets approved and we get the reconciliation stuff through, or we're going to have a climate civilian corps, where there are going to be tens of thousands of young people basically working on these two corps, many of whom are at USDA. And in a sense, it's kind of like a Peace Corps for rural America. So, yeah, I mean, I'm telling you, this is an amazing department. Trust me, folks, just trust me. It's an amazing place to work. And you could feel like you're making a difference every single day you come to work. And there are a lot of places where you'll be working where you won't have that same feeling every day.
Well, you certainly made that difference on me, and that's why we're having this webinar, because I wanted to share your enthusiasm and your passion for the Department of Ag and America. And I can't thank you enough for lending us a whole hour of your very precious time. So thank you very much.
Well, I'm happy to do it. I know that there are a lot of questions in the question box. So let me make this offer. If somebody could get those questions to my office, I'll have our folks try to work on answers so that you can get the 41 questions that are in the box right now. At least some of them answered. So
Mr. Secretary, we'll make sure we get that done. Okay. Congressman Farr, thanks very much for being a great host and moderator. You did a terrific job because you both left them wanting to come back for more. And Mr. Secretary, we'd love to see you out here in Monterey County again sometime in the near future. We'd love to have you back.
Not hard to want to come back to one of the most beautiful places in the world.
Well, trust me, we'll work hard to see if we can arrange that.